We're talking to Jim Quinn, and I thought it would be interesting to find out, exactly how he got started in radio, and then hear about some of the stories that I've had to hear over and over again, but you haven't heard yet, because those stories are great. I mean, he's had quite the life, and he's contributed so much to the industry. So we are going to talk to Jim Quinn, and we're going to start with the very early years of Jim Quinn.
I think probably it started when I was about 12. I really got interested in music because I started dialing around to the radio stations when I was 11 or 12, and I hit some of the R&B stations around the New York area, WOV, WAAT in Newark, which is now 970, The Answer. And I got interested in R&B because I'd never heard really music that I could relate to. My parents were all big band people, This is before Alan Freed coined the term rock and roll. It was called rhythm and blues at the time. James Brown, the Famous Flames, people like that, and the Flamingos and Chuck Berry and all that. It hadn't gone mainstream yet. It didn't go mainstream until Alan Freed showed up in New York City at WINS and eventually at WABC. Then it started to go mainstream, even though the adults hated it because we were all going to go to hell because we were listening to rock and roll. I got a saxophone, and I actually pretended to play the saxophone for about 10 years. I had a couple of bands, the Deltones, the Valmars, and then one in Cleveland when I went to school there. I really didn't go to school. I was just sort of there because I hated school. Oh, God, I hated school so much. Anyway, it was a group called the Sensations, and actually they had a lot of talent, but they just needed some direction and some choreography and some shticks to do, and taught them that and did a lot of appearances for a DJ at WHK back then, Carl Reese. So I got really interested in this, and like I said, I played the saxophone through high school and into college. So I was at John Carroll University, and I went there because they said they were going to have a radio station. Because I decided early on that I wasn't that good of a musician. I mean, I really wasn't even a musician at all. I was just faking it. And I wasn't going to be the next Bruce Springsteen. So I figured I'd probably make more money playing other people's music than actually doing my own.
But when you were young and you were listening to the radio, and you spent a lot of time, you told me, listening to the radio, What was it did you picture yourself not just as a musician someday, hopefully, but as a young Jim Quinn? Did you think you would like to be on the radio, whether it be your music or just your personality?
Yeah. I mean, I loved WABC in New York. I loved Dan Ingram because Dan Ingram wasn't just a format guy. He could stick funny stuff into the format without really violating the format. And he was just, I just loved Dan Ingram. He was one of my favorites. And actually, I kind of modeled myself after him because when you're first starting, you kind of model yourself about, to somebody else until you start to develop your own personality, your own approach to the business. And I was so good at it that one day I was driving down a road in Pittsburgh. You know where you make the turn to head out east off of the bridge? Mm-hmm. It was right there, and it was dusk, and I was listening to WABC in New York because it came in at sunset. And I heard the guy on the air say, "Oh, that's our own Dan Ingram, and nobody's like Dan." Well, there is this one guy in Dayton that does a really good impression of him, and that was me. Okay.
Wow.
So, but anyway, let's roll back here to John Carroll University in Cleveland. I went there because they said they were going to put a radio station on the air, college station, and that's why I went there. Well, they had a studio, but they never put the station on the air. So I used to go up to the studio, and they had a control board and two turntables. I used to go up there and play disc jockey when nobody else was around, and kind of sort of, got familiar with the equipment and all that. So one day I'm driving down Cedar Avenue in Cleveland at the corner of Cedar and Lee, right across from Heights High. I see I believe it was a DeSoto or a Studebaker dealer, I forget which, one of those. See, that's how old I am. And I saw a tower on the top of the building, and I thought, that's a radio station. So I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to see if I can get a job, or if they'll just let me hang around, okay? And I was there, to file records, to sweep the floor, whatever. And so I go through this green door and this long stairway, and there's a guy running down the stairway dressed in a coat and tie, and he's got a briefcase. And he goes by me. I found out later his name was Bill Preman, and he was a DJ at this WCUY 92.3 in Cleveland, which at that time, FM didn't even get into the ratings. They didn't even bother to include FM in the ratings. It was just so unimportant. And it was all beautiful music stations. But this station was like kind of hip because it was jazz. And jazz in the early 60s was moving into this very hip modern jazz thing, you know, with great people like Coltrane and so many, Wayne Shorter and so many others. And so it was kind of cool to work there. So I go up the stairs. Apparently he had just quit. His father had a heart attack. So I walk upstairs and I see this big room with a girl at a desk and all these records on the wall. And I look over and there's a glass wall, and behind it is the studio, and behind that is the transmitter. So this guy comes running out, Frank McHale. He comes running out and he goes, "Are you here for a job?" And I said, "Yeah." Of course, I was there to sweep the floor. I just wanted to be around, right? He goes, "Have you been on the air ever?" And I said, I did my best John Lovitz impression. It was like, "Yeah, I've been on W." He said, "You're on the air in 2.5 hours." And like, I am now petrified. Okay. So they throw me into the studio, and they didn't even have cart machines back then. They had these little reel-to-reels, and each commercial was on a reel-to-reel, and you had to cue it up to run it. So here I am in front of this control board. I was just awful. And I was awful for about a week, and then I started to get it and get comfortable behind the mic. And I worked 7 days a week, 6 hours on Saturday and 9 hours on Sunday. It was really grueling. And one day, after a couple of weeks, they walked in and they said, "Here's your check." And they handed me a check for $66, which was more than my mom was sending me for school. And I said, "What's this for?" And they said, "It's your pay." I said, "Wait a minute, I get to be on the radio and get paid too?" I mean, I literally was not expecting anything. So I worked there for a while. And I got a bunch of fan letters, actually. But I worked there for a while. And one of the things that they did to prove to advertisers that people were listening was if you went into a WCUY advertiser, you got the receipt. And you'd bring it to WCUY in exchange for albums. We would give them albums, okay? So I'm there for a while. And then one day there's this horrible snowstorm and ice storm, and the heater on the antenna fails. And so the antenna is now destroyed. And it's a terrible winter. We can't get anybody to go up there. We're off the air for months. We still got paid, $1.25 an hour. But up there, we were off the air for months. Well, at that point, I decided I got to do something else here. So I went downtown in Cleveland to WZAK, which was a foreign language station. They signed off at midnight. And so I told the guy, I said, "I want to do midnight to 6. I'll buy the time from you. You tell me how much you want, and I'll go out and I'll sell in the daytime." So I work all night, sell all day, right? So I headed out, and I got a couple of the WCUY advertisers that had been with me. Hatlow's Men's Shop, and now these were all in the hood because we had a lot of black listeners because it was jazz. And there was a muffler company. Anyway, so I decided I was going to try to get some serious advertisers. So I put on my coat and tie, and I headed down to 50th and Euclid. Right above WHK, there was the big advertising agency in Cleveland. I forget the name of it. But I'm sitting there in the waiting room, and I've got my little presentation all laid out. And so they call me in, and I tell them what I want to do, and they look at me, and they go, "FM jazz all night. Could you find anything else that would be of less worth than that?" So I said, "Well, you know what? I'm not going to let them discourage me." So I left, and I started hitting car dealers. And I ended up with Grabski, Pontiac, Ford, and Dodge, one of the biggest car dealers in town, because my price was so low. It was like, how can you say no? Okay. And I ended up at Erdilac Rambler Back then, it was American Motors. So I had a bunch of advertisers, and I was able to bring in enough money every week where I cleared about $75, which you could live on back then. And so one day, Len Anthony, who worked at WZAK, and he was one of those guys that wanted to be on Top 40 radio. You know, the guys that talk like this. He was a real yucky DJ, right? And so one day he says to me, I got one of those new cars, the Mustang, and I got an audition at WREO in Ashtabula, Ohio. This is a town of 25,000 people, which will give you an idea how important AM was then, because you would leave Market 11, the 11th largest market in the country, and you would go to a town of 25,000 people just to be on AM. So I said, come on, let's go. I said, okay, I'll get in the car. So we drove to Ashtabula, and we go into the radio station. I'm sitting in the waiting room. Len's doing his audition. Now, the audition at this this station was so far behind in so many ways. The audition was the NBC announcer's audition. You had to be able to pronounce the names of composers. You had to be able to do news. You had to be able to read commercials. There was a whole list of things you had to do into a Wallensack tape recorder. So I'm sitting out there, and Bob Raleigh, the family owned the newspaper, comes out. He's a manager. He goes, you going to audition? And I said, no. I said, I just throw it out here. I got a gig in Cleveland I'm doing okay with. Oh, come on, audition. I said, well, all right, I'll go in there. I got the job, and Len didn't.
Oh, no.
Now, not that Len was all that smart, because Len had taken, I'm trying to remember, this guy ended up as the dean of Cleveland News. The name will occur to me at some point. But anyway, he did the same thing a year before and took this guy with him, and that guy got the job.
Poor Len.
Okay? Poor Lenny, But he did end up doing part-time on the weekends, I think, on WHK. So he was kind of happy about that. So I'm on there. I'm on in Ashtabula, and there were no commercials on the radio station after 6 o'clock. And I'm thinking to myself, these guys don't know that people listen to the radio at night. And they think everybody watches TV at 6 o'clock. Okay? That was kind of a prevailing understanding at the time, at least for some radio stations, especially off in the woods, like in Ashtabula. So I'm thinking to myself, see, they told me what records I had to play. They had a huge record library. It was Peggy Lee, Frank Sinatra, all that stuff. And so for the first couple of nights, I did that. And then I went to the record store, and I bought the top 25 records. And I started playing them. These guys didn't even listen to the radio station after 6 o'clock. They had no idea what I was doing. So I'm on there telling the kids, hey, send me requests, send me dedications. Here's the address. And next thing I know, the general manager calls me in. By then, it was a different general manager who was a real dope. And he goes, what's this? And on his desk is this pile of letters all addressed to me. I said, well, I take requests and dedications and stuff. You better talk to Andy Hollico, our program director. I don't think you're playing the right music. So I go talk to Andy. Andy takes me down into the record library, which was huge. And he said, you got to play this. So, okay, all right, fine. So I go upstairs, and at 6 o'clock, I played a Peggy Lee record, and then I played a Frank Sinatra record, and then I went right back, because I knew they'd listen on their way home, okay? Then I went back to playing, and never heard a word about it for weeks. And once a year, they took an Arbitron rating. And the number one station that night was always CKLW in Detroit, because it came right across the lake. I had a 98 share. Today, if you have double digits, they'll build a statue in the parking lot to you, So, and at that point, they decided that, hey, this guy must be really good. Let's put him on an afternoon drive instead of at night, which was a big mistake, because the teen audience at the time, I was the teenage idol type disc jockey, right? And I should be on like from 7 to 11. Well, anyway, they put me on in the daytime. They carried the Cleveland Indians. And back then, most of the games were in the daytime. So I'm sitting there on the board. What am I doing? I'm running baseball games. So at that point, I went, I got to find something else. So I drive up to Conneaut, Ohio, right up, and there's a daytimer there, 1360 WWOW. So I go to the guy there and I said, you know what? You need a hot DJ on your station. You need some jingles. I got a jingle company I know. It's cheap. You can, we'll have it wonderful WOW 1360, all that stuff, right? So he said, okay. So he hired me, and I think I made $90 a week, and I did a split shift because he didn't have that many people. So I did like 9 to noon and 3 to 6, something like that. But I had to drive back and forth from Ashtabula. So one day, and I forget exactly how this happened, but one day I found out that WING in Dayton, Ohio was looking for a DJ. And I'm thinking to myself, that's a major market. Okay, Dayton, it's a medium, but it's a major market. I put together a tape, and I sent it to WING. And I don't remember how it happened that I knew about it. But the next thing I know, I get a call from Bob Holliday, the program director at WING. He says, I need you right away. So I told the guy that ran the radio station, I'm leaving. He said, no. He said, you're not going to give me notice? I said, I got to go. So I packed everything I had because I was living in a motel at the time. I rented a motel because you could do that in Ashtabula because the only time when it was difficult was in the summer when the tourists showed up. In the wintertime, they were happy to have somebody who would, occupy a room. So that was like $85 a month. So I pack up everything, including my lava lamp, in my Ford Mustang, and I head for Dayton. And I remember exactly where I was when I had a premonition. I was on Interstate 71 that goes from Cleveland through Columbus. Okay. It was where the road dips down and there's like gray walls on either side. And I had a premonition that I would never meet the guy that hired me. And so when I got to Dayton, the station was so cheap, they didn't even get me a hotel. So I had to find a place to stay. And I didn't have any money, right? So I rented a room at a flop house. I mean, this was a real flop. This is a place that smells sour, and so I had this little room in this flop house, and there was one bathroom and one bathtub just down the hall. It was like $50 a month. And I mean, if you wanted to wash your hair, you had to submerge yourself in the bathtub, see? And so I was there for about a week and a half, 2 weeks while I found an apartment. I finally found an efficiency apartment. So anyway, I go on the air at the radio station. I'm on the air for a couple of days, and I get approached by Ken, who's the sort of leader of the pack of the DJs there. He says, now that you are part of the staff, you're going to be part of our record hop at Forest Park. Well, what's Forest Park? Well, Forest Park is a shopping center. Here's what happened. Here's the history of that. So Ken was kind of standing as program director. He goes, you're going to be part of our group, so you're going to get a split. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, we have a record dance. They used to call them record hops back then at Forest Park Arena. Now, Forest Park Arena actually was the basement of Forest Park Mall. And this huge mall was built on a hill. So there was this, this place was huge. Two of the DJs thought it would be a great idea to do one at Forest Park. So they went to Holiday and said, are you interested in doing this with us? He said, no, I'm not interested. Okay. So they went off and contacted the two real estate guys that own the mall and said, look, we'd like to rent a place. How much? They said $75 a night. So they painted the whole inside black, put up psychedelic lights, put up a stage, and then hired a band and charged $1 a kid. The first night, they had 75 kids. They broke even. Okay. The second night, they had 2,500. And that's the way it was from then on. And the money was pouring in. And each DJ, whether we actually went there and emceed or not, we would rotate. Every Monday morning, I would come in, and there'd be an envelope under the turntable with my name on it, with more money than I was making from the radio station. I mean, it was like, I can't believe this is happening. This is great, right? So I went out and traded in my old Mustang, got another one. Things were going really well.
Were they pioneers in all of this? Is this something? This was not really happening in every city through every radio station, was it at the time?
In Philadelphia, there was Jerry Blavitt. Jerry was on WCAM in Camden, which was never a radio station that actually mattered, but he was kind of like the Terry Lee of Philadelphia, and he had a lot of dances, made a lot of money doing that. He had dances in Allentown. I mean, this was happening everywhere. Now, we started up our own dance. It never really equaled what it was at Forest Park. We never got that magic back. But at Forest Park, this was a time when the record companies were pushing all the new music, and music was changing rapidly. I mean, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and you cannot believe the parade of people that we had through there. I sat on the stage with Simon and Garfunkel and just talked trash. I sat with Janis Joplin. We had the Lemon Pipers who did Green Tambourine. We had the Byrds, Turn, 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 and Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man. We had, I wasn't even there for all of them. We had and they were all free. The record company, I'm sitting there with Paul Simon, and he's working for free just to get it out there. They just had Sounds of Silence. And there was a parade of people through there. I don't even remember them all. I think the Four Tops were there. It was just amazing. But the thing is, the reason I'm doing this is because at the time you're doing it, you don't think it's all that special. It's just a job. And then you look back at it and go, holy cow. And other people say, wow, you've had an interesting life. And you look back and you go, yeah, I guess I did. Anyway, we hired a band. We had a house band from Union City, Indiana, Rick and the Raiders. We paid them $150. Turns out Rick is Rick Derringer, the famous guitar player. And, of course, at the time, he wasn't famous. And then one night, we brought in these two guys that owned Bang Records, Goldstein and Cotherer, a couple of guys from Long Island. And for a goof, they had made this record themselves called I Want Candy. I Want Candy, right? So we brought them in. Well, they heard Rick and the Raiders, and they said, we're taking these guys to New York. So we lost our band, and they took them to New York, and they gave them a new name. The McCoys, Hang On Sloopy, and Fever. And then Rick, of course, went out on his own as Rick Derringer later on as an album rocker. Some interesting history there. Let's see. One day I get a call from John Rook. He's the program director of KQV in Pittsburgh. And he goes, would you be interested in working at KQV? So I pull out my road map and I look, and Pittsburgh doesn't look that big and Dayton looks bigger. And I said, no, that's okay. I'm happy where I am. So I'm walking down the hallway. Fred Winston, who ended up at KQV later on and then WLS in Chicago. Fred, a big, deep voice, right? Fred's walking down the hall. He goes, what's new? I said, I just had an offer from Pittsburgh, but I turned it down. What? He says, don't you understand? That's market 9. That's a top 10 market. I pick up the phone. John, I've reconsidered. I think maybe I would like to work at KQV. So I didn't hear anything for a while. John was a very crafty guy. I don't know how he did this, but I'm on the air one night and the hotline rings. Now, that's a phone number that nobody has but the program director. It's John. He's across the street at the Sheridan, and he's been listening for the last 2 hours. Now, that's smart because I've never been hired from an audition tape. If I'm sitting behind a microphone and I don't know that there's real people out there, I just suck. I can't do it. I just can't put my heart in it. I have to know that you're there, that there's real people there that I'm talking to. I just can't do it. And so that was smart. He, instead of asking for an audition tape, he went over and basically said, what does this guy sound like on any given night? I packed my bags and I headed for Pittsburgh. I remember driving through the dark for so long because back then it was a 7-hour trip because Interstate 70 hadn't been built yet. There was a little bit of 70, but it would be 70-40, 70-40. You'd be behind a truck on a big hill. And so it was really tough. So I get there. I'm driving in the dark, and I come through the Fort Pitt Tunnel. Well, people just freak out when they come out of the tunnel and say, "Oh my God, look at this!" And so anyway, so I'm working at KQV. I remember, I don't know if it was my first night or not. I remember I'm on my way to the station and it's raining. I'm in front of Gimbel's parking garage, and the light turns red, and I'm sitting there. I got a little MGB, and I'm sitting there, which cost me $2,800. Wow, a lot of money. So anyway, I'm sitting there in front of the parking garage, and the light turns red, and I figured this is a time for me to just look down here, grab my radio dial, and see what my competition sounds like. And I hear, "The Steelers don't look good, but the Browns are on the verge of total collapse. This is Myron Cope on sports." And I am like riveted. I can't believe never heard anybody with a voice like that on the radio. And I'm looking down and go, "Oh my God, what is this?" And I'm not paying attention. When the light turns green and the horn blows behind me, and I look up in front of me, and there is a cop on his hands and knees with white gloves blessing himself. Name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Right? It's Vic Cianca, the dancing cop, the guy that was in Flashdance.
Yes,
remember?
Yes.
That's when I said to myself, "I'm home. These people are as crazy as I am. I am home." Yeah, so I went to work.
Quite unique. Would you say Pittsburgh was more unique than any other market that you worked in?
Oh, there's no question. Pittsburgh was very different. The cobblestone streets, the trolleys, and all of that. In a sense, we were less cosmopolitan than other cities. I mean, Cleveland was market 11. We were market 9. Cleveland has always been more cosmopolitan than we are in some senses. But, on the other hand, we don't jump on every new thing. We don't throw away the things we love for the next big thing. I remember when I came here, I turned on the radio. Porky was playing oldies from the 50s. I'm going, wow. I didn't hear that in Dayton, Ohio. And we do that. We have a tendency to hang on to things. And that's why there aren't any attics in Pittsburgh full of Nehru suits, because we didn't just jump on, the next big thing right away. We hold on to the things we love, which, by the way, do you remember High on a Hill by Scott English?
Yeah.
Well, you know what? It's interesting that's a 1950s doo-wop song. And when I came back here in 77, there were 20-year-old girls at National Record Mart still buying that song. That song was played at every wedding. It was played at the end of every dance. And it was only a hit in Pittsburgh. Nobody outside of Pittsburgh ever heard of High on a Hill by Scott English. And there's a story about that, but I'll get to that story later. Okay, so the first KQV Shower of Stars at the Civic Arena that I emceed, because they wanted to push me out there right away, was at the end. It was at the end of 1967, and it was Herman's Hermits. Mrs. Brown, you want a lovely daughter. Remember that? The warm-up band was The Who. The warm-up band was The Who. A year later, or a year and a half later, they were the lead. I mean, they had the album "Who's Next" with "Won't Be Fooled Again" and Baba O'Reilly and all that stuff on it, and they were big time. So anyway, at some point, I got a call from Paul Drew at WIBG in Philadelphia. This was after I'd been at KQV for about 10 months, and he said, "I want you to work for me in Philadelphia." So I said, "Okay, Philadelphia, that's a big time. That's like Market 4. So I get in the car and I drive out there. I'm listening to the radio station on the way in, and I'm listening to my competition, and I'm realizing this is not going anywhere. My competition is fantastic, and this is just not all that good. So anyway, I did 10 months at WIBG, and then I got a call from John Tenaglia, who was the sales manager at KQV. He said, "If you'll come back, I can get you $400 a week."
Wow.
And I went, whoa, okay. So I came back in February of 69, and I stayed there until November of 72. Now, by the time 72 rolls around, 13Q was coming on the air, and with Buzz Bennett, who was a radio guru from San Diego, who was a guy that put these really hot top 40 stations on the air. And KQV decided we can't compete with that. So we're going to go adult contemporary. And that means we don't need you, Quinn. So what they did was they wanted to make me program director of WDVE in Pittsburgh. And I was program director of WDVE for 3 days. Then they decided that the guys in New York wanted to meet me before I actually settled in. So I went to New York and I got a meeting and an audition with the top brass at Rock and Stereo ABC in New York. Well, they decided they wanted me in New York. So I had to pull up stakes, head to New York. I didn't want to live in the city. I didn't want to give up my car, so I got an apartment in New Jersey. I hated being in management. I absolutely hated being in management. It sucked. I mean,
I'm sorry, I don't see you as managing.
Oh yeah, I mean, I had to wear a suit and tie every day, and I remember I had to do all these. You got to fill out reports, right? See, when you're in management, it's all about paperwork. So I have to do a report on the state of the radio station every week. All right. So one week, right in the middle of it, I put this sentence in. A sentence said, "If you've read this far, there is a Sony Trinitron portable TV waiting for you in the prize closet. Come and get it." No, nobody ever came and get it. I got it. I mean, nobody ever reads that crap. No, they don't. So anyway, the one thing I could do at WPLJ was to fix the music. The music was just, the guy that was running the music was just awful. He wasn't really playing rock and roll. So I fixed that, and we went from an average quarter hour of 34,600 to over 100,000. And we went from a weekly Cume audience of 700,000 to 1,300,000. But the brass were not happy because it was mostly men. And I tried to explain, I said, look, the women will follow what their guys are listening to. Remember, it was the 70s. I said, just give it time. And then they started telling me, well, how come you don't play the Carpenters? Could you imagine playing the Carpenters on an album rock station? Well, WABC plays it, and they go, no, you guys don't understand. People don't come here for that. They don't expect that. Well, how about Free to Pain? No. Well, I fought them until finally we had to come to Jesus meeting, and it was clear that if I didn't do it their way, then I was going to be fired. So I called Neil McIntyre over at WPIX FM, and I said, you need a jock? He said, yeah, I need somebody 7 to midnight. I said, I'm there. He said, you got it. So I turned in my resignation. I remember I folded it into the shape of a paper airplane and sailed it into Lou Severin's office as I walked out. But before I left, I wrote up a 4-page treatise as to why it was that what they were asking me to do would destroy what we had accomplished. And I told Lois Levine, who was my secretary, I said, Lois, when the book comes out, the Arbitron reading book, when it comes out, whether I'm right or whether I'm wrong, I want you to send this out, and I want you to carve in everybody from Elton Rule, who was the CEO, all the way down to the mailboy. So she said she would, right? Well, I'm over at WPIX FM, and I'm doing a telethon with Murray the K, and who sadly I think is gone now. And somebody comes up to me and says, the book's out. Really? Did you get the numbers? Yeah. 34,600 average quarter hour, 700,000 Cume. The exact numbers that I had when I came in before I fixed it. It had I couldn't have orchestrated this better. Guess what? She sent it out. She almost got fired for it. She sent it out, and the place was in an uproar. I didn't think she'd do it, but she did it. So I'm at WPIX FM for about a year. It really wasn't going anywhere. Bob Harper, who had been my program director at KQV in Pittsburgh, Bob called me and he said, look, I'm PD at WKBW in Buffalo. And I'm thinking, well, that's a big radio station. For years, when I was a kid, I on the Jersey Shore at night, I could listen to Tom Shannon on WKBW. So I'm thinking, this is a big deal. It's a medium market, but it's a big deal. So, and he says, I want you to do 7 to midnight, and I want you to be music director. Okay, so I drive up there, and my first night on the air, the equipment is terrible, and I can't get myself to sound the way I want to. It was a struggle the whole 4 years I was there with the equipment. But anyway, so I'm on the air, and I walk outside into this parking lot. Now, understand, I'm used to walking out onto 42nd Street, out of the building with the Daily Planet building with the big globe. Then that's where it was. And I mean, you talk about culture shock. I'm thinking to myself, am I in that movie with Artie Johnson where he ends up at the Devil's radio station? I forget, it was Night something. It was a series back in the 50s. And I was like, oh my God. But as time went on, things kind of worked out. And because I was music director, I got to meet a lot of people. Got to have dinner with, Elton John. I had dinner with so many, Tony Orlando, every star you can imagine. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. I mean, because that was part of being a music director. They would come in and they would wine and dine you, and then, you would hopefully play their record if it was any good. And one day, I'm at Sebastian's on Main Street in Buffalo, which is just down the street from the Anchor Bar, the famous wing joint. And this is one of those restaurants where you make somebody an offer they can't refuse. So I'm sitting there with Jerry Myers, who is the local independent record promoter, and Melissa Manchester and Barry Manilow and Clive Davis, Arista Records. And Mandy is just setting the charts. Great song. Well, maybe I should go back a little bit further here in this story before I get there. When I was at WPLJ, Bob Harper was still at KQV. And he called me up and he said, we've got this great idea. I said, what's the idea? He said, Scott English, High on a Hill. Scott English has a new song called Brandy. And not Brandy or Fine Girl, different song altogether. Still on YouTube. You can look it up. He said, we're going to bring him in to the KQV Shower of Stars. We're going to open the show with him, but we're not going to tell the audience who he is. He's going to sing his new song, and then we're going to come out and say, ladies and gentlemen, this is Scott English. And he's going to go right into High on a Hill, and the place is going to go up for grabs. And I said, that's a great idea. So the night comes, and Scott English had never worked before a large audience before, and he stepped out on the stage, and he looked out at the Civic Arena, and he froze up. He had stage fright. He ran off the stage. He never did it. So there I am in Buffalo with Clive Davis, and I turned to Barry, and I said, did you write Mandy? And Clive goes, no, as a matter of fact, people dump records on my desk all the time. And there's this record by this guy I never heard of, Scott English, called Brandy. And I thought if we slow this down a little bit, son of a gun. That's the connection between Mandy and Pittsburgh. Mandy is actually Brandy, slowed down just a little bit. Scott English's version is really pretty good. Didn't get any promotion. So with Clive Davis behind it became a huge hit. I said to Clive, I know that guy. He said, you do? I said, yeah. He's got the number one oldie in Pittsburgh. Everybody knows this song. He said, but nobody ever heard of him outside of Pittsburgh. I think he got a little airplay in Philly, maybe in New York, but that was about it. Yeah, so that was Buffalo. Let's see. Anything else? And I learned to fly there. There was an airport right behind me. I could actually walk to it. It was only a couple 100 feet through a stand of trees. And I was always scared of flying. So I decided if I get my pilot's license, maybe I won't be scared of flying anymore. I hate studying. As you know, I hate school. But if there's something I want, then I can knuckle down and really do. So I got my pilot's license in a month and a half. I remember, I actually crashed a plane, but that was the instructor's fault. It was his fault. But the FAA came in to investigate. They asked my instructor, we'd like to meet one of your students. And he said, well, I know which one it is. So consequently, I didn't take my flight exam for my final license with a CFI, a certified flight instructor. I had to fly to Rochester, and the FAA did it. And I had a guy named Jerry Cullen. Jerry was so fat, we were a couple of pounds out of the envelope with just he and me in the airplane. I'm surprised we actually got off the ground. But I passed with flying colors. But anyway, the thing is, then I bought an airplane because I bought an airplane for $7,800. And it was equipped with double nav, triple com, wingtip strobes. I mean, it had everything. And I flew that thing around. I had more fun with that thing. That was just, I loved it. But I'm still afraid to fly. I still don't like getting in an airplane.
You're not the pilot.
Right, because I'm looking up there and I'm thinking, I've seen too many air disasters on Smithsonian. I have watched guys with thousands of hours do things I wouldn't do at 5 hours. I mean, just rookie, dumb mistakes. Then I get a call from 13Q in Pittsburgh, and they want me. Bob Savage, who now owns WYSL that I'm on in the morning, was actually the program director at 13Q. And this was, unfortunately for us, the declining days of 13Q. They had already lost their FM. The FM had become Wish because the FCC made them all separate their programming. And by this time, Buzz Bennett was gone. The guild was off the rose, and they were trying to salvage the station. So I went there. I did 2 years there and brought the ratings up a little bit. That was never a real success. And then I was out of work for 7 weeks. And Ted, you get scared, when you're out of work. So I sold my airplane. I can't believe I did that. I should have kept the damn thing, because 7 weeks later, I get 3 job offers in one day. I get a job offer from Channel 53 to be booth announcer. That was $20,000 a year. I get an offer from Ted Atkins at WTAE, and that was $31,000 a year. So now I'm at $50,000. Holy cow! I mean, man, this is big money. And also, the guy over at WIXZ in McKeesport wanted to do a talk show. So I had 3 offers. So I took 2 of them. I took the one at WTAE, and I would work there from 10 to 2 in the afternoon, right after O'Brien and Gary. And then I would go to Channel 53 and do all their booth announcing and do this thing called Primetime Scramble, there was a board behind me with numbers on them and shows on the other side of the numbers. And we'd call people, and they would try to remember what show was where, so they could match up the shows and win the money or whatever. And it was a pain in the butt, because I would be there till like 11 o'clock at night, 11:30. So I'd be getting up at 7, going to bed, getting home at 11:30 at night. So I took both of those jobs. By the way, Ted Atkins, for those of you who don't know, for those of you who are fans of WKRP in Cincinnati, when they dropped the turkeys out of the airplane and they started hitting the ground like sacks of wet cement, and Les Nessman is going, "Oh, the humanity," and the general manager says, "As God is my witness, I thought turkeys could fly." That is a quote from Ted Atkins. He did that back in the early 60s. I believe it was KIMN in Denver. But anyway, he had to hide out from the cops for 3 days. Good old Captain Showbiz. What a character. And God bless him. He one of the best general managers I ever worked for. Just a really super guy who led a very libertine, crazy life of women, alcohol, you name it. And in the end, he met Karen, and he turned to Jesus. Let's see, where was I? So now I'm doing 2 jobs. And then what happened was Jack Bogut, who was the morning guy at KDKA. Now, KDKA is the only 50,000 watt AM in the market. So consequently, they get good ratings, whether their programming is good or not. He was negotiating his contract, and he wanted a TV show, and Channel 2 wouldn't give it to him. Well, Channel 4 found out about it, and that was our TV station. Channel 4 found out about it, and over the weekend, Channel 2 put it out on the street that Jack had signed, but he hadn't. And so Fred Young over at WTAE television went to Ted Atkins and said, "We're going to give this guy a TV show, but he's going to have a radio gig, so you got to put him on WTAE." That meant O'Brien and Gary, who were a great morning show, but they were a 25 to 54-year-old act. They had to put O'Brien and Gary on their FM, which was an 18 to 24 radio station, and then they put Jack Bogut on in the morning ahead of me. Okay, I knew at that moment that was going to bomb. It wasn't going to work. So what I did was I got on the phone. I called Steve Kingston over at the newly minted B94, which was an FM top 40 station, which had just gone on the air. And I said, "You looking for something?" He said, "Well, I got a guy in the morning named Banana Don. He's real young. We need somebody to get like the 25 to 54 audience, somebody that the market knows." And I said, "Team us up." And he did. And it worked very well for 10 years.
When you were at, was it 13Q, where we could watch you? I remember I was probably in a...
No, KQV is where you could watch.
KQV, okay.
The corner of Walk and Don't Walk.
That's
Remember?
what you would say.
Yeah.
You said that.
Well, Chuck Brinkman was the first guy to say that. I'll give him credit for that one.
So now you're over at B94. And
Right.
I think that's where a lot of people actually remember you at the corner of Walk and Don't Walk, by the way.
Yeah, the older ones do.
Yes. B94, you were there for 10 years?
Almost 10 years.
Yeah. So before we go into now, because that's after those 10 years, you make a transition from DJ to talk show
Talk
host.
radio, right.
Yeah. Before we do that, can we go back and I have some questions I want to
sure,
ask
go
you
ahead.
about your DJ years. Mm-hmm. What was it? How did you develop your style? Because you did have a unique style. You were very funny. You had your personality came through. How did you develop your style?
I don't know. I started out by imitating Dan Ingram, and eventually I just started to be me, and
I think that's important because one of the things you talked about Pittsburgh and how unique it was and the different personalities and how long we keep them on radio and TV.
Right.
I think it's because many of them are just themselves. And I think that's one of the things that have endeared people to you all these years is they felt like they knew Jim Quinn.
Yeah, the people on TV around here, I mean, they were just like ordinary people. Mm-hmm. Paul Long. So tell me, Mr. DiNardo, what do the isobars hold in store? Shars, Paul, shars.
I mean, you're not going to hear any of this anywhere else.
No. I mean, I consider myself really blessed to have spent most of my life here because I really can't imagine, other than the weather, okay, but Florida sounds good, but, Florida has things that Pittsburgh doesn't have. They have sinkholes, they have fire ants, they have tornadoes, and they have a thunderstorm every day at 4:30. Okay, so I'll deal with the winter weather here. A good fireplace and some cords of wood will get you through that.
Yeah, but you did have some natural talent, natural ability. You knew when to insert a funny line, and you are a funny guy. I don't always like to give that to you, but you are a funny guy.
Well, where I learned some of this, now that you mention it. When I was in Cleveland doing that jazz gig, as a matter of fact, I got to interview the Beatles at the Sheraton Hotel.
Oh, when were you going to tell us that?
Well, here's the sad part about it. I had a little Craig tape recorder, and I didn't even belong there because I was on an FM jazz, but somehow I got in there, and there was a panel, and I get to ask the Beatles questions, right? When I opened it up, the tape was caught in the lid, and and it's lost forever.
Oh God, that's
broken-hearted. But anyway, so I'm in Cleveland, and there was 2 top 40 stations. WHK, which was pretty much a formula station, 5,000 watt on 1420, and they got really good ratings because they covered most of the market. But then there was KYW, which was 1100. It's now WTAM. KYW was the most unique radio station I've ever heard. There has been nothing ever like it. Martin and Howard in the morning were 2 guys that did all kinds of shticks. They were like, who was the guy on KDKA years ago? Famous name. Went to California. Ended up, every time you turned on a sitcom or a TV show, if there was a scientist in a white coat with one of those things on his head, it was always him. I mean, he got so many jobs out there. It'll pop in my head. Anyway, so they had Martin and Howard on in the morning. These 2 guys were hilarious. Sound effects, people going in and out, door slamming and all that. Followed by Jim Runyon. Now, that's the guy who did the Chicken Man series, which never actually happened in Pittsburgh, but some people will remember the voice. Well, what is Chicken Man doing now? And Jim Runyon was, back then it was called housewife time, 10 to 2, because women didn't work mostly. They just were at home. He would romance that audience in ways you can't imagine. He was so smooth, and he would play all the top 40 songs, but he would play his theme song was This Boy. Who's the guy's? George Martin's version of This Boy. He would read poetry on the air. And then that was followed by Jim Stagg, who was the straight ahead top 40, here's the countdown today. And then Jerry G came on, Jerry G. Bishop. And that's the first time I heard people using wild tracks. Now, a wild track is when you lift something off of, say, a commercial or a TV show or whatever, and you throw it in, okay? Now, everybody I knew in radio would just like throw those things in. Jerry talked to them. And in other words, you know, he would say, okay, well, you want to hear the weather? I certainly would. Oh, okay, well, here it comes. And you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so he would actually go back and forth. They would harass him. And his engineer was a guy named Tom who used to let me in. And it was a union station. Jerry couldn't control all those carts. Tom was like reading Jerry's mind. I never saw two people work together like this in my life. You could throw stuff at Jerry, and he would have something to say about the wild track that just played on the air. You know, it'd be something like, well, it's the 4th of July. I really don't feel like having. Oh, you're having a little fun at your country's expense here, and would be the wild track that would be thrown in, and he would react to it. And that's where I learned to do that. Which, yeah, well, I mean, I still actually use those.
Yes, you do.
See, I think the best talk show hosts are the former Top 40 guys because they know how to play with the medium. Rush knew how to do that. Yeah.
All right, Jim, let's talk about now your transition from DJ.
Mm-hmm.
How did that happen?
Well, I got sued for telling a joke. Anyway, what I learned throughout this was that the media had an agenda because the evidence was all on our side. And the media had an agenda. And what was interesting to me was the difference between what I was seeing and the way it was being portrayed in the media. And I was a bit confounded by that because I always thought the people that complained about the media were just sour grapes. One day I'm driving home and I turn on WTAA, it was on the weekend, and I hear Rush Limbaugh. And after what I had been through, I was stunned to hear that he was saying the things that he was saying. I thought, you can't say that. And then I thought, wait a minute, what country is this anyway? Of course you can say this. And so I started listening to Rush, but I had to listen to him on 1100 in Cleveland. I had to get a really good radio, and I would just barely bring in 1100. And, you know, Rush said to me, he said, can't you get me on KDKA instead of weekends on WTAE? I said, I wish I had some clout over there, but I don't. But at some point, he ended up on KDKA, which was one of the only smart things that they've ever done. Anyway, yeah, they were smart. They would have put O'Brien and Gary on in the morning. They would have been just huge on a 50,000 watt station. Oh, God. Anyway, but that's what got me into politics because I realized, wait a minute, this is political. Up until then, I was not into politics at all. This is political, and politics can hurt you. Politics can have a real effect on your life. And so I'm listening to Rush, and I'm learning for 2-3 years. 96.9, the Frischling brothers said, look, we got a morning show you can do for $72,000 a year. Well, that was a $120,000 pay cut for me, but I took it anyway. It was like, okay, I'll take whatever you got. And they put me on there, and I started like sticking little political things in, and all of a sudden I'm starting to get a lot of mail. And I went to the owner, Greg Frischling, and I said, Greg, do you mind if I throw a lot of politics in it? No, whatever you want to do, go ahead. Well, I owe my career to that guy because he was okay. He let me do stuff, and then they hired you.
Well, I was working 2 floors below you at the Christian radio station, and I was one of those people that started hearing what you had to say in between the songs. And I thought, okay, I hear where he's going. I've got some books I can pass on to him, and that's how we got to know each other.
Well, Christian radio was way ahead.
We were way ahead.
Way ahead back in the 1990s. And so you would bring up articles to me that I could look at. And I remember one day I was interviewing Walter Williams.
I was there that day.
Yeah. And I'm
talking.
Great
interview, by the way. Right?
Oh, yeah, it was a great interview.
He's amazing.
I love Walter Williams. God rest his soul. One of the great minds. Anyway, here comes the program director. He's in the other room looking through the glass at me, and he's going, play a record. Don't keep talking. Play a record. Cut it. Right? And it was that point that I think you marched in to his office and said, don't you get it? This is a talk show.
Yeah.
And from then on, we dumped the records. We did a talk show. We invented the War Room thing. The guy from Stargate Industries, who owns the Mavericks down in Texas.
Oh, right. He's
Mark Cuban.
Yeah, Mark Cuban.
Yeah,
yes.
Mark Cuban put us on the air because he was a nobody at the time.
Now he doesn't know who we are.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he doesn't. I'm sure he's not going to take credit for putting my show on the air. But anyway, so we were one of the first on broadcast.com, which was one of the first ways to get radio on the internet.
Yeah.
So, and then we started to get ratings. That went on for, I think, 11 years. And at some point, Clear Channel, which is now iHeart, apparently they started to get curious about why it was that this other rock station was number 2 in the morning and number 14 the rest of the day. So they started listening to us. And the next thing you know, they hired us at 104.7, and we did 10 years there. Mm-hmm. And it was quite lucrative, and we had pretty much of a good time, mostly.
Mostly. The Frischlings were great people, actually, to work with, because when you told them you were leaving, they shook your hand and they said, "We wish you the very best," because there was no contract at that place.
No.
And I thought that was interesting too, that they understood it was a good move for you. I'm sure they hated losing the revenues.
Well, yeah, we generated a lot of revenue. Our listeners responded to advertisers in ways that advertisers aren't used to.
Did you ever see that before in your career?
No, not in top 40. No, I mean, if Banana and I would show up at a mall, we'd get maybe 10 people. You and I would show up, we'd get 700. We'd get a rope line. And of course, our philosophy was always the NASCAR philosophy, which is if somebody comes for an autograph, they're going to get it. You're not going to leave. If you're hired for 2 hours and you got 3 hours worth of people, you're going to stay until the last person is spoken with and taken a picture with or whatever, and gets an autograph and stuff like that. But I mean, it was interesting, the response, especially, and also from advertisers, as we just talked about a moment ago. But the advertisers that we had at 96.9 and also at 104.7.
Well, they came with us. They came
with us, yeah.
Some of them are still friends. We
still are friends with some of our advertisers.
Yes, yeah.
Yep.
Let's call this segment, Jim, Brushes with Greatness.
Yeah, close but no cigar. Yeah, let's see. I've had some brushes with greatness. Vince Lombardi was my next door neighbor when I was a kid. I was 15 and I lived in New Jersey, and I lived on Kemp Avenue. He lived on Lockwood Place, right around the corner. And when the word got out in the neighborhood that Vince was coming, he couldn't get my father off his chair without a spatula. And but I didn't care. I didn't know who he was, and I was into radio. And after a while, I started playing with his young son, young Vince. My sister, Mary Margaret, started playing with Susan, the daughter. And I remember his house. It was kind of one of those little houses that the people from New York would summer in. When they closed down the Broadway shows because it was so hot. And they would come to the shore. And it was a weird house. When you walked through the front door, the first thing you walked into was Vince's den and office. And then you went from there to the living room, and from the living room to the dining room. It was laid out almost like a railroad car. You went from one room to the other. And I saw these, clippings from Fordham and stuff, and I had no idea. All I knew, he was a great guy, very nice. He went to Catholic Mass every day of his life, 7 days a week. He would get up and he would go to the 7:35 Mass at Nativity Church in Fairhaven. Then he would catch the 8:23 to New York from Red Bank Station. So he was a unique guy. And so that was one of my brushes with greatness. And my freshman football banquet. You know how the nuns can put the arm on people, right? Yeah. The nuns at Red Bank Catholic, I got a hold of Vince and said, "Can you get us a speaker for the football banquet at the Shadowbrook Inn in Eatontown?" And so in walks this young guy, about 22 years old, 21, blonde hair, brush cut. It was Frank Gifford. He was the speaker in his freshman year at my football banquet. Let's see. Other brushes with greatness. I was with Kiss at the printing plant in Lackawanna, New York, when they mixed their blood with the paint because the comic book was printed with Kiss blood. See, that was the whole thing. And of course, I could have gotten the first comic book that rolled off the press, and I didn't do it. I don't know. Again, it was just a job to me. Anyway, I loved meeting those guys. Let's see what else. I had O.J. Simpson's Rolls Royce for a week. And the way that happened was I was working at WKBW in Buffalo, and the local record distributor, Lenny Silver, had just signed a guy by the name of David LaFlame. Well, David LaFlame was the previous lead singer in a group called It's a Beautiful Day. And they had a song called Whitebird. And it was huge in Pittsburgh. It was real big on WDVE. So I told Lenny, I said, you know what, Lenny, if you have him re-record Whitebird, I'll play the heck out of it on WKBW, and it's going to be a hit. Well, I did, he did, I did, and it was a flop. It was a genuine flop. And so he said to me, I wish I could do something for you. I said, I can't take anything. And he said, well, how would you like to have O.J. Simpson's Rolls Royce for a week while he's in L.A.? So it was a 1958 right-hand drive, which, by the way, is very easy to get used to. I didn't think it would be. So I said, look, there's only one condition, I'll take it. I have to give you something in return. So I said, I will detail the car from top to bottom before I return it to you. So that was a lot of fun. I had a chance to meet Elton John at Bills Stadium in Orchard Park. Let's see, who else? Oh, when I was in Buffalo, Cher. I had dinner with Cher, but she was very nice. She was very cordial. She's really short.
No, she is.
Yes, she is. She's really short.
If she's really short, then Sonny had to have been like...
Yeah.
Really? Because she was always way taller than him.
Well, my memory of hers, I mean, there's a picture of me and her together.
Yes.
I mean, we can take a look at that, but it just seemed... I was there with David Kahn, who was the rep from Warner Brothers Records, and Dion was there at the Executive Motor Lodge performing. Remember Dion and the Belmonts? And so he was there, and right in the middle of his show, he said, anybody want to do some oldies? Well, I knew all the harmony parts to all of his songs, right? And so I just jumped up on the stage, and we had a great time. And that kind of reminds me, too, when I came back to Pittsburgh in 77, I managed to find a girl singer for the Skyliners. They needed one, and she lived right across the street from me. And she was fantastic. So I hooked up Joe Rock, the manager of the Skyliners, with Kathy Cooper. Here's what we would do. I would plug their appearance wherever they were going to be on 13Q, and then I would go there and sit in the audience, and they would bring me up when it was time for the oldie medley, and because I knew all the harmony parts to those too, and I'd get up there and sing background with them. Yeah, I guess that's it. My brushes with greatness.
And at the time, you didn't even think much of it.
No, not real. Other than, our house band, Rick Derringer, which I've already talked about.
So when you look back, what were some of your favorite times? I know that you you still do enjoy talk radio, because now you're on WYSL in Rochester, New York, and you've got warroom.com that anyone can listen to at any time if they subscribe, warroom.com. 2 R's, 2 O's. But if you had to take a look back, I mean, what were some of the pivotal moments in your history, your radio history? When was it that you thought, okay, this is it. I know I am where I need to be or wanted to be. Was it the very first time you went into a radio station, sat behind a mic, in front of a mic?
No, it's when I started doing talk radio.
Really?
Yeah, I never thought it was that good of a disc jockey.
But you were. People loved
no, but you had nothing to compare me with. Because there are disc jockeys in this business that I've heard. They're so much better than I was. On a scale of 1 to 10, I give myself a 6.5.
Interesting.
Maybe a 7. And I was never really, well, especially when I started doing mornings with Banana Don. I mean, we kind of clashed. I mean, he wasn't crazy about the fact that I was there. He was a good guy, but I was like, why did they bring this old guy in? And I never really felt. I really feel comfortable with talk radio because on a scale of 1 to 10, I give myself a 9.5. And I feel very good about that.
I agree.
So talk radio for me is the highlight of my radio career. And frankly, doing what I'm doing now, where people subscribe to the show. And remember, we were on XM satellite radio on channel 165 and 158 for about 6 years. So we had people all over the country. And they subscribe. And I get to do the show in the morning in my bathrobe with my cat, G. Gordon Kitty. And I mean, maybe it's not a picture that you want to think about too much.
No, not
but
at all, in fact.
I get up at 2:00 in the morning, every morning, and by the time 10 minutes to 6 rolls around, I'm just about finished, and I go racing downstairs. And there's times when I don't even have time to do a planner sheet. I just wing it and say, okay, I'm going to use this, and this move. And then while the news is on, I finally do the planner sheet. But it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
That you work very hard on that show.
I go to bed every night at 7.
So boring.
I know.
And then you're up at 2 or 3 in the morning. One of the things that people don't know about you, and I was astounded. I've never met anyone quite as generous as you. No, really. And Jim, when there's been needs in the community, I remember when I was working for the flood relief in Sharpsburg, there was such devastation, and I would call you and I'd say, Jim, I need 5 stoves, 3 refrigerators, 2 washing machines. And you know what? You had it to me. You had them delivered. You bought them and had them. People don't know you did that because you don't want people to know. I know you don't, but I do. I want them to know because, there's a lot to Jim Quinn that people don't know.
I went to Sears Scratch and Dent. Remember?
Well, that doesn't diminish what you did at all, but
Yeah.
okay.
I went to Sears.
I've done that myself.
Yeah, what we got, I think it was 15 stoves and 25,
In the end, yes.
25 refrigerators.
Yes.
And the interesting thing was,
Not you did this.
I'm thinking to myself, how am I going to get these there, right? And so I walk out the back, and there's a big truck there right on the loading dock, and there's an ex-Marine. And I don't know how we got involved in conversation. And I said, what do you do with this truck? He said, I move refrigerators and stoves. I said, could you do me a favor?
Oh, really?
And yeah,
I didn't
he
know
brought
that.
them all to the loading dock down in Sharpsburg, right?
Yes, that's where our warehouse was.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
That's just one example. This is just one of the things that people don't know about you. And it wasn't just that time. There were any time that you've heard of needs in our community, you always stepped up and you did something. You have one of the most generous hearts of anyone I've ever met. Were you always like that?
Yeah, I was always like that. When I was a kid, my grandmother used to say, he's so generous. And it's because I never thought clinging to things was a comfortable feeling. It's just like, if I can live without it, you can have it. Or I've got mine. Here's, if I've got 2 and you want 1, I'll give you the 1. I mean, I never saw any purpose in clinging. Maybe that's why I'm not a really, really rich guy now. I'm doing okay, but...
That reminds me of something else, too. One of the things you've taught me is that it doesn't pay to be jealous or to look at what someone else has.
Oh.
You always said, be glad for what they have, but you always looked at it as your own personal journey. Listen, I'm glad they have that, but I want to succeed on my own. I'm not going to be jealous of someone else. I'm not going to spend time looking at what someone else has or the success they have.
Well, jealousy, I mean, it's not because I'm such a good person. It's because jealousy is stupid. Because jealousy is like tailgating, okay? It's not going to get you there any faster, and you risk a catastrophe. Okay? There's just no point in jealousy. It doesn't get you anything. All it does is eat you up inside, and it misdirects you to that person instead of to your future. So celebrate what they have. Tell your subconscious mind, be like that. Okay? Send me in that direction. It's just like being angry with somebody. Anger will, I think, was it the Eagles? There was one song that said, the anger will eat you up inside. Really, life is a lot easier when you forgive because you just walk away from the pain. It's gone.
That's good, Jim. And one of the other things, too, you taught me is I remember saying, that person that we're working with, I don't know how they get away with what they're doing. You would always say, you will be here longer than they will. They'll be way gone before you are. And it was always true.
Well, yeah, management comes and goes, and then one day we go. But
yeah, one day we go too. We've done that a couple of times. So if you wanted to give advice to anyone who wanted to get into radio, or now podcasts are a big thing, what would you say?
Don't do it.
Would you not say that?
No, I wouldn't say that. Look, I mean, if you love doing it, look, I would do radio if I wasn't getting paid. Remember, my first job, I didn't even know I was going to get paid. Okay? Do the thing you would do even if they weren't paying you, and then you'll never work a day in your life.
A lot of people wanted to hear about your background, and they were just curious. And you are loved by a lot of people in Pittsburgh, Jim. I mean, this has become your home, basically. I mean, out of all the markets you worked in, this is the best market that you've been in.
And I'll never go back to New Jersey. You know New Jersey, where the state motto is, "Hey, I got your state motto right here."
How would you like to be remembered?
I don't really think about that.
But
you can
let's think
remember
about
me
it.
whatever way you want to be.
I know that is you. You don't care.
Yeah,
no, that's not really true.
Well, the thing is, eventually you won't be remembered. Okay? I mean, do you remember Ed Chauncey? Ed Chauncey was one of the biggest radio stars in the city of Pittsburgh in the 20s and 30s and 40s. Uncle Ed, he was the guy during the newspaper strike. Like Fiorello LaGuardia, he would read the comics on the air to the kids who couldn't get the comics because the newspaper was on strike. Ed Chauncey was he was an icon, but nobody remembers. You know, you go to the museum, as the people that loved you die, they forget you. But it's not a big deal. Everybody gets forgotten eventually. Sooner or later, your life ends up at the curb.
We've seen that happen.
Yeah. It's been fun, but we're done.